She was already 3 rows deep into the apple trees when the black SUV came up the lane at 6:30 in the morning, kicking gravel in every direction, like it had somewhere more important to be. Sloane Morrow didn't stop picking. She pulled a Spartan from the branch in front of her, checked it for bruising, and set it in the bin at her feet. She heard the car door slam. She heard footsteps on the gravel, expensive shoes from the sound of them. Too clean for a place like this. "Hello?" A man's voice. Deep clipped, the kind of voice that was used to being answered immediately. She came around the end of the row. He was tall, dark-haired, wearing a gray blazer that probably cost more than her truck. He was looking at the farmhouse, the way people look at things they're already calculating the price on. He had a phone in one hand and a paper coffee cup in the other, and he hadn't touched either since she'd appeared. "Can I help you?" she said. "I'm Archer Galvin." He said it like she should recognize the name. "I'm here about the orchard." Sloane looked at him steadily. "I know who you are," she said. "Your grandfather talked about you." Something crossed his face. Not guilt, exactly, but something close to it. "Then you know I've inherited the property." "I know you're one of 3 people who might have a claim to it," she said. "I'm another." The coffee cup lowered slightly. "I'm sorry?" "Edward left me a caretaker agreement. It's registered with his estate lawyer." She pulled off her work gloves and tucked them into her back pocket. "Your grandfather and I had an arrangement. I manage the orchard. In exchange, I live in the cottage on the north end of the property. It was his idea, actually," he said. She paused. "He said the orchard needed someone who'd love it properly." Archer Galvin looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the trees, then back at her. "I'll need to see that agreement," he said. "I'll make coffee," said Sloane. Mr. Lacroix drove up from Summerland the following afternoon and spread the relevant documents across Edward Galvin's kitchen table with the careful efficiency of a man who had spent 40 years cleaning up other people's complicated legacies. The agreement was real. Sloane's name was on it. Edward's signature was dated 14 months ago, witnessed by 2 neighbors, filed with the notary's office in Penticton. "The estate is clean," said Mr. Lacroix, "but the operational clause complicates the timeline." Edward specified that the orchard must be registered as an active farm business for the full 12 months following his death before any transfer of ownership can be legally finalized. He passed 9 months ago. 3 months remain. Archer was quiet, his jaw was tight. "And if it isn't registered in that time," he said, "the property reverts to the Okanagan Agricultural Land Trust." Mr. Lacroix folded his hands. Edward was very specific. He did not want this land sold to a developer. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Sloane looked at Archer. She saw the muscle in his jaw tighten, then deliberately release. "There's a second complicating factor," Mr. Lacroix continued, setting another document on the table. "A formal purchase offer has been submitted by a company called Hargreaves Pacific Holdings. If no valid heir claim is filed within 8 weeks, the offer proceeds to probate court." "Hargreaves," Archer said very quietly. "You know them?" Sloane asked. He didn't answer. He picked up the document and read it through once, and when he set it down, his expression had gone somewhere flat and contained. "I'll file the heir claim," he said. "What does that require?" "An actively registered farm business," said Lacroix. "A named operator on the registration, filed income, proof of continuous operation." He looked between them. "Ms. Morrow is currently the named operator. Mr. Galvin is the property owner of record. For the claim to hold against a legal challenge, those 2 interests need to be formally joined." Sloane looked at Archer. Archer looked at Sloane. "How formally?" she said. Mr. Lacroix cleared his throat twice. It was Sloane who said it first, and she said it the way you say something when you're thinking out loud and immediately wish you hadn't. Edward mentioned once, it was almost a joke, really, that the cleanest solution, if things ever got complicated, would be if someone in the family married into the operation. She paused. He was mostly joking. Archer set down his mug. He wasn't joking. "You couldn't possibly know that." "I know how my grandfather thought." He looked out the kitchen window at the orchard. The late light was dropping, and the trees were throwing long shadows across the grass. He was deliberate. He was thorough. He thought 3 steps ahead of every problem he ever encountered. He turned back. He knew I'd come here eventually. He planned for what it would take to make me stay. Sloane stared at him. I'm not marrying a stranger, she said. I know that, he met her eyes calmly, but you knew my grandfather. And I know enough about you to know you've kept this place running for 3 years on your own, without wages, without complaint, because you believed it was worth saving. He looked at the tidy harvest records on the counter, the repaired window latch, the new caulking around the sink. I'm not talking about love. I'm talking about keeping this orchard out of Wade Hargreaves' hands. Sloane was quiet for a long moment. Why does it matter who buys it? You were going to sell it. Not to him, Archer said, and something in his voice closed off the question entirely. They wrote the agreement themselves, at the kitchen table, with a pen that kept skipping on the notepad. Sloane's conditions: 1. Separate rooms, neither enters without knocking. 2. No decisions about the orchard, harvest timing, labor, equipment, anything, without consulting me first. 3. You don't ask about my father. I don't ask about your history with Hargreaves. 4. You eat what I cook or you cook your own. I am not a housekeeper. Archer read through her list, took the pen, and wrote one line at the bottom. 5. No falling in love. This is a business arrangement, it stays that way. Sloane looked at the line. You felt the need to put that in writing. In my experience, he said, things that aren't written down get misunderstood. And in your experience, she said, is that typically a risk? He looked at her calmly. Sign it, Ms. Morrow. She signed it. He signed it. Captain, the orchard's resident billy goat, chose this precise moment to appear at the back screen door and slam into it with tremendous conviction. That's Captain, said Sloane. He doesn't warm up to strangers. Archer looked at the goat. The goat looked at Archer with the settled contempt of an animal who had already made its assessment. I'll be fine, Archer said. Captain ate the corner of his blazer. They drove to the registry office in Penticton on a Thursday morning. They had the marriage license, the farm business registration forms, and 2 witnesses. Bet Foulkes from the neighboring property, who had cried 3 times before they'd even left the driveway, and Betta's husband Glenn, who seemed to have arrived under the impression this was a different kind of appointment entirely. The justice of the peace was a compact, brisk woman named Judith, who had presided over 30 years of Okanagan marriages, and was not going to let this one be interesting. Do you, Archer James Galvin, take Sloane Elaine Morrow to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Sloane Elaine Morrow, take Archer James Galvin to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. You may kiss the bride. A silence settled over the small room. Sloane looked at Archer. Archer looked at Sloane, neither moved. There was a part of the procedure we didn't account for, Sloane said quietly. I'm aware of that, said Archer. Judith cleared her throat. Archer leaned in and pressed a brief, careful kiss to Sloane's cheek. Formal, contained, approximately 1.5 seconds in duration. It was still enough to make Bet Foulkes produce a sound that was somewhere between a sob and applause. By the time they got back to the orchard, Bet had already phoned 4 people. By the following morning, Summerlin knew Sloane had married a millionaire from Vancouver, that the wedding had been a private ceremony, and somehow that there was a baby involved. This last detail had no basis in fact whatsoever and could not be traced to any specific source. The valley has a gift, Sloane said, reading a text from her neighbor on the south side. For what? Said Archer. Improvement of the facts. She set her phone face down on the counter. Tomorrow you'll probably be a duke. The harvest was 6 weeks away, and the orchard needed everything at once. The irrigation lines on the east block had been leaking since July. 3 of the packing crates had rotted through. The small tractor had a fuel line issue that Sloane had been managing through familiarity and stubbornness. And the apple grater, an ancient machine Edward had maintained for 32 years, had started making a sound she could only describe as worried. Archer showed up in the orchard the morning after they returned from Penticton in clothes that were wrong for it. Clean dark jeans, a collared shirt, and stood at the end of a row with his arms folded. What needs doing first, he said. Sloane handed him a pair of work gloves and a list. He looked at the list for a moment, then looked at her. Some of these require equipment I've never operated. "I know," she said. "I'll show you." She expected him to push back. He didn't. He pulled on the gloves and followed her. He was slow at first, and precise in a way that was slightly maddening. He measured before cutting anything, read every reference page she handed him, asked questions she hadn't expected from someone who'd likely never repaired anything with his own hands in his adult life. But he was also stronger than she'd calculated, and he didn't stop. By the end of the first week, his shirts were permanently beyond saving and he'd stopped trying. Captain monitored all of this from a cautious distance, occasionally charging Archer from behind when he appeared distracted, which was often enough to be statistically significant. "That goat," Archer said one evening, retrieving a piece of cuff from Captain's teeth. "He's still making up his mind about you," said Sloane. "On what basis?" "Whether you belong here." She glanced over. "I'm doing the same, honestly." Archer considered this. "That's fair," he said, and went back to work. Wade Hargreaves arrived on a Friday afternoon when the light was amber and the valley looked gentler than it was. He was Archer's age, perhaps slightly younger, and he moved through the world with the ease of someone who had never been told no by anything that mattered. Silver Range Rover. A smile that had been professionally calibrated. Sloane was alone when he pulled up. Archer was in Summerlin picking up parts for the grader. "Mrs. Galvin." He extended a hand. "I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk. I knew Edward, wonderful man. This place clearly meant a great deal to him." "It still does," said Sloane, not taking the hand. Of course, of course." He looked at the trees the way Archer had on that first morning, but without whatever had been underneath Archer's assessment. Just the calculation, nothing else. "My company's offer is a serious one, better than the orchard can realistically generate over the next decade. I imagine managing this alone since Edward passed has been exhausting." "I'm not managing it alone." "Right, the marriage." He smiled warmly. "Quite sudden. Archer and I go back a long way. I want to be upfront with you. I don't think he's told you everything about his reasons for being here." "He told me not to ask about his history with you," said Sloane, "which told me most of what I needed." Something shifted behind Hargreaves's expression. "He's using this property to spite me. You deserve to know that." "Maybe," said Sloane. "That's between him and his conscience. It's not why I'm here." She looked at him evenly. "The orchard isn't for sale." He left 10 minutes later, still smiling, which was somehow more unpleasant than anger would have been. That night, after supper, Sloane put 2 mugs of tea on the table and sat down. "Hargreaves came by today," she said. Archer's hand stilled on his mug. "He tried to negotiate through me." She wrapped both hands around the ceramic. "I said no, but I think you should tell me what actually happened between you two." "That's condition 3, he said quietly. "I know." She met his eyes. "I'm asking you to set it aside." Outside, Captain could be heard working on the gate latch with patient determination. It was a project he'd been pursuing for 11 days. Archer was quiet for a long time. "He was my business partner for 6 years, he said at last. "We built a development company from the ground up. 3 years ago, he negotiated our largest contract behind my back, moved it to a new company he'd been quietly incorporating for a year. My fiancée at the time went with him. In both the professional and personal sense." A pause. "The story made the papers, the kind that keep it on file." Sloane said nothing. "So you came here," she said after a moment. "I came here because my grandfather was the only person who never once asked me what had gone wrong." He looked at the table, and then he was gone too. She didn't offer sympathy. In the weeks she'd spent watching Archer Galvin, she'd learned that wasn't what he reached for. Instead, she slid the second mug across the table. He looked at it for a moment. "Thank you," he said. It was the quietest she'd heard his voice. She fell on the 14th day before harvest. A ladder rung she'd tested and trusted, and a bin that shifted at the wrong moment. She came down hard on her left side, and by the time she'd made her assessment, she knew the wrist was sprained and the ankle was worse. Archer found her sitting against the base of a tree, working through her options. He didn't remark on it. He crouched down, checked her over with a focused calm that seemed out of place in him, then helped her up and took most of her weight for the walk back to the house. He cleaned the scrape on her arm at the kitchen sink. He found the first aid kit in the cabinet above the fridge, which she hadn't told him about. He rapped her wrist with the wrap she kept in the bottom drawer. "You've done this before," she said. "I coached junior hockey in my mid-20s," he said, cutting the tape. "Sprains every other weekend." Sloane looked at him. "You coached junior hockey. Don't make it biographical." "I'm not." She watched his hands, careful, methodical. "I'm just recalibrating." He glanced up. She looked away first. The frost warning came on a Tuesday, 12 days before harvest. The overnight forecast was -3, and a hard frost at this stage would compromise the crop severely, enough to break the season's income record and potentially the farm registration's viability along with it. They were in the orchard until 2 in the morning, covering trees, running the wind machines, checking the irrigation lines they'd rigged for frost protection. Bet and Glenn appeared next door without being called, arriving with thermoses and extra tarps and not a single question. At 3:30, Sloane stopped moving and stood in the middle of the orchard in the dark, just listening. The wind machines ran. The temperature held. The trees were covered. Archer came and stood beside her. "I think we got them," he said. She let out a slow breath. "I think so." They were both exhausted and filthy, and the dark was full enough that she couldn't quite make out his expression. But he was standing close, and when he shifted his weight, their shoulders touched briefly, and neither of them moved away. "Why did you stay?" she said, not accusing, just asking. "I told you, Hargreaves." "I know why you came." She turned to look at him. "Why did you stay? You could have hired 3 people to run this place from Vancouver. You didn't have to learn the irrigation timer or sleep 4 hours and come back out in the cold." She looked at him steadily. "Why did you stay?" Archer Galvin looked at the rows of covered trees in the dark, breathing steam in the cold air, and for once didn't answer immediately. "My grandfather loved this place," he said at last. "I think I needed to find out whether I could too." Sloane nodded slowly. They stood there without speaking until the temperature held and the stars began to pale toward morning, and Captain appeared from somewhere and settled against Archer's left leg with the finality of a decision made. Archer looked down at the goat. Then he reached down and scratched him behind the ears. "Don't read anything into that," Archer said. "I didn't say a word," said Sloane. Harvest came in on a clear Thursday in late September. They picked for 4 days straight, with Bet and Glenn and 2 university students from Penticton who'd answered Sloane's posting, and by Sunday evening the bins were full, and the grader had run without stopping, and the tally at the end of it was the best the orchard had produced in 7 years. Sloane saw the number and stood very still for a moment with her hand on the counter, and Archer, watching from the doorway, understood that he was looking at years of work made visible, years of care that had asked nothing back. He didn't say anything. He poured 2 glasses of the Galvin family's reserve cider that Edward had kept in the cellar, set one on the table in front of her, and raised his. She looked at the glass. Then she picked it up and touched it to his. 3 days later, they found the document. Sloane had been clearing out the back room of the farmhouse, a space Edward had used as an overflow archive, when she found a box in the far corner, neatly labeled in Edward's hand, "Deed History, Original Covenant." Inside was a document dated 1987, 11 pages, properly signed, witnessed, and registered with the Township of Summerland, a permanent agricultural covenant attached to the land title in perpetuity, prohibiting any use of the property for resort development, hotel construction, or commercial tourism infrastructure of any kind. Hargreaves Pacific Holdings planned to build a resort complex. The purchase offer was legally impossible to execute. Sloane sat on the floor of the back room for several minutes, holding the pages. Then she went to find Archer. He read it twice. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and was quiet for a long time. "He knew," Archer said. "Your grandfather?" "He knew Hargreaves was buying up land in the valley. He must have found out what was planned." Archer set the document down. He protected the orchard before he died. He made sure it was in the deed history, properly filed, waiting to be found. He paused. He trusted that someone would look. Sloane looked at the pages, then at Archer. Neither of them said anything else. There wasn't much left to say. The orchard was safe, and they both knew it, and the knowledge sat between them quietly. Mr. LaCroix made the necessary calls. By the following Thursday, Hargreaves Pacific's legal team had been formally notified of the covenant. By the end of the week, the purchase offer had been withdrawn. Archer told her on a Friday evening. She was sitting on the front porch in Edward's old Muskoka chair, watching the last of the light go gold across the valley below. "The arrangement is fulfilled," he said, standing in the doorway. "The farm registration is clean. The heir claim is filed. Hargreaves is done." He paused. "You've kept every condition. You don't owe me anything further." Sloane looked at the valley. "Are you asking me to leave?" "I'm telling you that you're free to go." He looked at the porch boards. "The cottage is yours if you want it. Formally. I'll have LaCroix draw something up." "And you?" "I'll go back to Vancouver. The company's been running without me since June." Sloane was quiet for a moment. "Your grandfather's chair is on this porch," she said. "I know. He sat in it every evening. He said it was the best part of the day." She looked at him. "You've been sitting in it every evening for 3 weeks." He didn't answer. "This place asks something of you," she said. "It asks you to actually be here, to pay attention to it." She looked at him steadily. "You've been here, Archer. Really here. I don't think Vancouver can say the same." He was quiet for a long time. Captain came around from the side of the porch with the unhurried deliberateness of an animal that had made a final determination. He walked past Sloane's chair. He walked to Archer and pressed his head against Archer's knee and stayed there. Archer looked down at him. He looked at Sloane. Then he came out onto the porch and sat down in the second chair, the one they'd dragged out from the barn in October so there would be 2, and looked out at the valley in the last of the light. "The irrigation timer on the east block," he said. "It's drifting about 12 minutes. I noticed it this week." Sloane looked at him sideways. "I know, I was going to reset it Monday. I can do it tomorrow if you walk me through the calibration." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." He kept his eyes on the valley, on the dark rows of trees, the last gold spreading across the ridge to the west, the lights beginning to appear in the houses below. "I want to." She turned and looked at him, and he was already looking back, and neither of them said anything else about arrangements or conditions or what the rules had been. The light finished going. The stars came up over the Okanagan, clear and cold and unhurried. Captain lay down at the foot of Archer's chair and closed his eyes. It was nothing like what either of them had planned. But sometimes the life you end up with is the one that was quietly being built for you all along, by someone who loved you enough to leave you exactly the right door.